Hello, welcome to Living Christianly in a Pluralistic Culture. My name is Steve Whigham. I'm the author of Eclipse of Faith, and I will be talking to you today in our third lesson of 12 on modern day Judaism. If you've been following along, you know we've been talking a lot about the world religions. We started off with Christianity in lesson 2. If you remember, we talked a little bit about how the world population is made up of Christians, but also we want to talk about Judaism today. Judaism represents 2% of the United States population, which is a little over 6 to 7 million people worldwide. You can see that on the slide to the right that they don't really quite register because it's in the 14 to 15 million range. And depending on how you count who is a follower of Judaism and who is not, there are more Jews in the United States than there are actually in the state of Israel. By some ways of measuring. So that's really interesting to know. So that's the reason why we're very interested in talking about the Jewish religion and also just the Jewish culture in general. We'll get more into detail on that in a second. Here's been our plan all along. This is the third week, modern day Judaism. So this is where we're going to be spending our time today. Last week we talked about pluralism and Christianity. We talked about the different major branches of Christianity. And I wanted to share some more information with you that I wasn't able to cover because of time. And we talked about the Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Protestant denominations as the major camps, I guess you can say, are religious traditions inside of Christianity. And one thing that's interesting to keep in mind, I think I did not talk about it with any credible detail last time, but I think it was important to at least understand, is that there are real differences between these three. You've talked to scholars and seminarians who are in the Orthodox tradition or in Roman Catholic or in Protestantism. They would disagree significantly on a lot of church ideas, a lot of what's really part of the faith. And I did not want to discount that. I wanted you to take that into consideration as well as we move forward, that there are significant differences that we just can't gloss over. I think that would be unfair if we did. I did want to share one quote from St. Augustine that I did not cover last time that I think has been very helpful for me. Hopefully it will be for you as well. He said this at one point. He said, "In essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. In all things, charity." I think that's really good for Christians to remember when we start talking with people of different religious traditions, even inside of Christianity. There will be some unity that's necessary. That's why I talked so at length on the Nicene Creed as being really critical last week, if you remember. The non-essentials, we should have liberty. In other words, we should allow people to disagree with us and without having to compromise unity. And of course, in everything, we should be doing it with love, or charity, as St. Augustine said. This is an important concept. The real problem with this definition is what's essential and what's non-essential. And everyone has a different measuring stick for that. So that's what makes it even tougher. But I think in general, this is great, and this is great wisdom. And we should keep that in the back of our minds as we go forward. It's very easy for the non-essentials to become the essentials. It's easy sometimes even for the essentials to become non-essential. So in our pursuit of unity. So let's be careful with that. I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly what the right way is. Hopefully I've got it figured out, but I may not. Knowing how many different opinions are there in the Christian world today, I can't say that with confidence. But there you go. Great quote, something to remember. In essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. In all things, charity. That's very good words. Remember, from the first week, we talked about what a religion is. Now, this is my definition. It's based upon a consideration of a lot of different definitions of religion. And this is the one that I came up with, so I haven't seen it anywhere else. And if I've purloined this by accident, my apologies. That's my subconscious taking over. But I don't think it's been said this way in so many words. But basically, when we think about religion, which means a rebinding or bringing back together, that's what really religio means. this is the definition that I think has probably been most helpful to me. Hopefully it's helpful to you. It's a way of ordering one's life based on what one perceives as ultimate reality. All of us have an idea what reality is. Maybe we think that the world has been completely created out of chance and randomness, and that reality then informs how we ought to order our lives. Do I support religion? Do I not? Do I do good charitable deeds? Do I not? Those things actually will inform my way of ordering my life. So, and there's so many people who have different ideas of what reality looks like. That's why we say as one perceives as ultimate reality. It's our perception. Hopefully it's based upon our perception is based upon truth. But there's a lot of times in my life, and I'm sure if you're the same as I am, that you've noticed that occasionally you've had ideas that really were not true. And that's always frustrating when you find those out, but that's just part of being human and being limited in our abilities to understand everything. But if this is the case, then everyone is a religious person. Because if I'm an atheist, I'm thinking that the ultimate reality there's no sense, there's no divine cause, there's nothing driving this thing besides just the sheer power of the physical realm, and that's my reality. And I perceive it to be true. And then if I do, then I order my life based upon it. And I act as if that is the ultimate reality. So therefore, I am a religious person. That's kind of why I like this definition, because it really does clarify everything. And so take it for what it is, but that's hopefully my contribution to the world. We also talked about how do people choose their religion, and we found out that most people choose a religion based upon their family background or their community. That's been the primary ways that most people have connected with a religion to begin with. I know that was for me, and I know of a lot of people I've talked with, it's been the same for them. There have been very few people who have jumped ship. They've gone from Christianity to Islam, or Islam to Christianity, or to Buddhism, or Judaism to Christianity, or Judaism to Islam. Those things have happened. But it's been interesting to find out when talking with and reading some of the stories of these people who have switched their religions, it's been rather interesting how they actually made those choices. And it really surprised me when I started seeing some of the underlying ideas behind the moving from one tradition to the next. We talked about the three transcendentals in the first week, if you remember, about truth, goodness, and beauty. These are things that we need. This is what the human heart and the human consciousness needs in order for that we know we need, and we know we need absolutely. And truth is really the manifestation of what is real. It is actually what corresponds with reality. That was the way many philosophers have actually phrased what truth is, as a correspondence to reality. And then goodness is actually a right response to that reality, called the 3R principle. The right response to reality, and that is goodness. So goodness is built upon truth if it is corresponding with reality. And beauty really is the magnification or the value enhancing part of what our goodness and truth is. And it's these three transcendentals that really move the soul. Truth gets its strength from being, from actually the reality itself. Goodness is only good as it responds to truth. And beauty is actually only beautiful when it actually responds to goodness and truth. So that's the basic idea of how the three transcendentals work kind of hand in hand. But what's really fascinating about these three concepts is that from a psychological standpoint, especially how we choose religion, we usually are not necessarily convinced most by truth, but by beauty and goodness first. And this is what we need to really understand about how people actually are attracted to one religion or another, is that they see the beauty and the goodness of those religions, and that usually leads them ultimately to accept the truth of that religion. And so keep that in the back of your mind. We'll be using that as a construct as we discuss the religions as we go along. We did talk about the worldviews of religion. And there's so many commonalities between Judaism and Christianity. You see the highlighted bar down at the bottom, is that there is a lot of significant similarities in the way that the religion is actually constructed. So we'll be using that a whole lot. And since we are talking basically to believers and Christians today, our our way to understand other religions is really based upon how Paul acted in the book of Acts, in Acts 17, when he was talking to the men of Athens, the great debaters, and he actually stood before them in the Areopagus, and he actually talked to them very plainly about religion. And here's some observations we can take from his story. First of all, we noticed in this passage that Paul observed the people around him, that he was very observant. He was watching people. He understood what he saw, and he was very curious about how people thought and people related to the world. We also saw that he was publicly engaged. He did not just live in a little isolated corner of the world. He actually was very much engaged with other people. We also noticed in this passage that he spoke positively. What that means is he spoke into other people's traditions with an affirmative frame of mind. He affirmed what they were talking about. He understood them. He understood why that they believed what they believed and what they were seeking after. And we see that in this passage. We also notice that he spoke intelligently. He just didn't speak out of hand. He actually knew what he was talking about, and he knew the faith traditions of others. And that's the reason why we're doing this series, is that to understand the faith traditions of others so that we can engage in a meaningful conversation and be able to know how to navigate a pluralistic world. Another thing we also learned is that Paul inserted the gospel of Jesus Christ as a completion of their worldview, not as a replacement. He talked about how Jesus Christ really fit into how they were thinking. This is something that really a lot of Christians we got to realize, is that people who are in other religions or are in those religions are adherent to those religions because they see truth there. They see something there, and it's true. We're going to learn that when we see all these religions, that there's some amazing truth in all the world's religions, and it's really foolish to think that is not so. And we see that very plainly in the way Paul talks about his religion in this passage. And the last thing is that not everyone converted, but some did. He realized that he is not the one that's going to make or break someone's faith. It's really up to the moving of God himself in order for people to be converted. And that's a humbling thing for all of us. We're not going to be able to turn the world upside down unless it's what God wants to have happen. But we participate. We do things because we love. And so there you go. I also want to remind you of something we talked about in the first week. Again, is Christopher Stendhal's 3 Rules of Religious Understanding, which I think are just absolutely eye-opening. I really think they're important to understand. First one is learn from its adherents, not its enemies. When you look at someone else's religion, it's very easy for you to take an opinion of someone who doesn't even practice the religion. Actually, you're at risk of doing that by listening to me. Sometimes when I talk about the religions, I will not be an adherent, but I'm not its enemy, that's for sure. But be careful about that, because it's easy to take a role of trying to prove their other religion wrong, a polemic against the religion, which I hope doesn't happen in this series of conversations. Don't compare your best to their worst. That's a very tempting thing to do, saying, well, we've got it all figured out. And you look at your religion only from a positive point of view, and only look at someone else's religion from a negative point of view. And we're going to try to avoid that in this conversation as well. And just so you know, everything I'm about to show you concerning Judaism, I have taken from the mouths of rabbis. I have spent a lot of time just scouring their literature and their conversations in order to understand how they see Judaism today. And the third thing is leave room for holy envy. What that means is that there's probably some neat things that they're doing in their faith traditions that we could learn from. So keep that in the back of your mind as we go forward too. All right, let's jump right into Judaism. An old and ancient religion that's been around for as long as man's been able to record things. So it's been very rich, very much involved, and it's hard to even separate some of our own understandings of the world without having have to tip our hat to what Judaism has brought to the table. One thing that's really key to know is that Judaism has always seen itself as a chosen people by their God. And they have called themselves the chosen people, that they have been selected by God in order to have a special relationship with Him. And that's important to always keep in mind, because it really frames a lot of the ways that they approach their religion and their role in the world. One British writer kind of snarking back at the idea of the chosen people. He said this. His name was William Norman Ewer. I'm sorry. He said, "How odd of God to choose the Jews." He meant that to be of course, a polemic, but it's kind of a fun little phrase that he threw out there. And then a Jewish thinker responded back. He said, "Not odd of God. Goyim annoy him." I love that when I saw it. Goyim actually is a Yiddish word for Gentile, so it played off very nicely. Not out of God, Goyim annoy him. But from a Christian point of view, I like what Ogden Nash once wrote, the great poet. He said, "Not out of God, his son was one." And this should be a real encouragement for all of us who are Christian to really want to understand this religion the best we can, because Jesus was extremely Jewish. He was Jewish from the very get-go, and we owe a lot of our understanding of who God is through the Jewish tradition. So important for all of us to keep that in the back of our minds. One thing about the Jewish people is that it's not easy to just classify everybody in the same kind of light. Some people are Jewish because they are religiously Jewish. Some people are just culturally Jewish. They really don't have much religious connection at all, but they believe in the culture of Judaism. Some people were born into Judaism in a racial standpoint. Their mother was Jewish, their grandmother was Jewish, their great-grandmother was Jewish, so therefore they are Jewish. And some people are Jewish because they are actually part of the new state of Israel, or national. But the thing is, what's really fascinating is that a lot of times when you meet Jewish people, you may be surprised that they're not maybe observant in the religious sense, but still feel very compelled to be called Jewish and are very connected to their Jewish heritage. That's important for all of us to remember. That's the reason why you can actually say that someone is actually an atheist who is Jewish. That seems like it's impossible for Christians to be that, because that would just destroy the very idea of what Christianity is. But for Judaism, that makes sense, because if you are nationally Jewish or culturally Jewish, maybe even racially Jewish, but not religiously Jewish, you could actually be atheistic and Jewish at the same time. So that may be surprising to some people of faith to think of Jews as having that possibility, but that's true. So as you talk to people who are Jewish, just keep that in the back of your mind. You got to find out exactly what their connections to Judaism truly are, and it may surprise you unless you really pay attention. There are two big cultural flavors of Judaism today: the Ashkenazi Jewish culture and also the Sephardic Jewish culture. Most of the Ashkenazi Jewish culture began or has grown up from kind of north of the Black Sea up into the Germanic world, from Russia all the way over into France. We call that the Ashkenazi Jews, and actually Ashkenazi actually means Jewish. German. Sephardic Jews were those actually around the Mediterranean. Sephardic actually gets the name from Spain. And so they're two different cultures, but they don't really compete with each other. They're just different, and they know their differences. They have differences sometimes in the way that they do some of the liturgies and some of the processes, and even some ways that the faith is expressed. The Sephardic Jews would have some ideas different from Ashkenazi. In the United States, most of the Jewish community has Ashkenazi roots. So we see a lot of the Ashkenazi Jewish traditions in the United States. If someone talks about speaking Yiddish, then that's actually Ashkenazi. That's just a brand of German and mixture of street German and Hebrew, and they call it Yiddish. So you'll hear some of that. So when people say they feel verklempt or oy vey, they say that's all from the Ashkenazi Jewish tradition. So just keep that in the back of your mind in case it is helpful to you. Let's talk a little bit about the history of Judaism. I'm going to talk post Jesus Christ into the future, into the time when after the Bible was, the New Testament was written, and into times when that was actually post Second Temple. If you remember, if you've studied any of the New Testament in the Christian Bible, you'll know that there are, that was actually written during the Second Temple period. Some of the actual writings were actually written after the Second Temple. We won't go into all that. That's for another class altogether. But there were really four major groups of people post-Jesus, people who lived past Jesus of Nazareth's time on earth. And I'll call this the Second Temple period. This is named after, of course, the Second Temple in Jerusalem, the one that was around when Jesus walked on the earth. There were Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Nazarenes. Four sects of Jews at the time. And yes, and the Nazarenes are the people who actually were following Jesus. And during that time, there was a lot of interaction, going to the same synagogues and having the same worshiping together very early. The Nazarenes worshipped with everyone else. And it wasn't until the Nazarene sect, which turned out to be the Christians of today, started to disengage from the oral traditions of the Jewish community, that we saw a separation. So, but the big piece of history that happened right after that was what's called the Bar Kokhba Revolt of 136. Well, actually started about 133. Simon Bar Kokhba was a military man who some people thought was going to actually be the Messiah. And so he led a revolt against the Roman government, and it didn't go so well. Matter of fact, one of the rabbis of the time, Rabbi Akiva, was actually supporting Simon Bar Kokhba and was promoting the fact that he was the Jewish Messiah. And when the revolt failed, then of course that ended very quickly as well. And so after that was really a big dispersion of the Jewish community into a lot of different countries outside of Jerusalem, and we would call that the diaspora. The Pharisees, the traditions of the Pharisees became really the rabbinical tradition that we see today. And the Nazarenes, of course, ended up becoming the Christians we know today. So yes, so the rabbis who we hear about today actually are still following the tradition of the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees were the kind of the middle of the road when it came to religious doctrine. They were not quite as liberally minded as the Sadducees, and were not so Hellenistic, and they weren't so extreme as the Essenes. They were kind of the middle path. They're the ones that actually survived the Bar Kokhba revolt. The Sadducees fell apart, and the Essenes were actually persecuted. Some were even killed. So there's a lot of interesting history there. I'll let you do the research on your own to see what happened during that time. It's a very critical point in the Jewish history. The diaspora, which means the dispersion, happened after that, where a lot of Jews started traveling into north and to even south and into the far west of Europe, into Spain and places like that, in order to find a place to live. We call that the diaspora. And so that's really everything from that point forward. We see that the Jewish community has not really had a home of its own, and has been living among other nations up until 1948. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about that. Zionism. That's the movement that actually started the country of Israel today, the state of Israel. Zionism was a place where, a movement that was trying to give Jews a place of their own. And I won't go into a lot of that history, but it was back in the 1800s where it began, late 1800s where it really started to thrive. And then, of course, it happened in the early 1900s with the Balfour Declaration. In 1917, we started seeing a place for them to start to live back into the Palestine area. And then ultimately in 1948, there was a nation, the nation of Israel as we know today. So just so you know, not everyone who is a Jew is really excited about Zionism. Okay, and this is sometimes in the United States we kind of mix these two together. Because the Zionist movement is really not a religious movement; it's a secular movement. There are quite a few religious people in Judaism who do support and are ardent Zionists. There are others that are not. So don't think that the whole Jewish community worldwide is all excited about what's happening in the state of Israel. There's a lot of, a lot of the founding documents of the state of Israel do not even mention God at all. Very secular, and that's caused a lot of people who are very observant Jews to be, to not be as enthusiastic. Just want you to know that as you start to talk to people, just don't make that assumption that everyone who is Zionist is also, everyone who is a Jew is also a big supporter of Zionism. But there's quite a few, so I don't want to discount that either, but just want you to be aware it's not a one-to-one relationship. Then also a couple other things that are usually kind of prickly when it comes to talking about Jewish history, I want you to be aware of. Another big issue in Jewish history, of course, was what happened during World War II in Germany, during what we call the Holocaust. I want you to, I don't know if you knew this or not, but if you didn't, I wanted you to be aware of it, is that there are a lot of Jewish people who don't like to call it the Holocaust, which actually means a holy fire. That was actually a term coined by people who were not Jewish. People inside of Judaism like to call it Shoah, S-H-O-A-H. The reason why that's called that's the word for catastrophe, and they think it was a great and grand catastrophe. Of course, it was when 6 million plus Jews, 1.5 million of those were children, were actually murdered by the German government, is catastrophic. And so the term Holocaust is a very commonly used term, but the way that the Jews like to talk about it is Shoah. So if you mention that, I think that may show a little bit of respect that we understand the gravity of that situation. Also, just for your information, using the name of God, I hear it quite a bit in Christian circles. And I'll say it now, just if a Jewish person is listening to me, my apologies, but we use the term Yahweh in Christianity, and that's for the name of God, and that's actually the name of God that the Jews prefer not to use, actually do not use at all. And I think that's really kind of a beautiful thing, that they have that respect for God's name. So I think it'd be really smart for we Christians to understand that and to treat it with the respect it deserves. Just to give you a quick little flyby, there are quite a few different types of Judaisms that are out there. Not every Jew is exactly the same or has the same idea about religion. This is a big chart, and I won't go into fully everything out. This is a chart that I created that helped me try to make sense of it all back a little while ago. But there's a Reformed movement that's been very popular as of late. Back in the 1800s, that began in Germany, in Hamburg, Germany. There's a conservative movement that actually really is kind of an American phenomenon. We'll talk a little bit about that. There's Orthodox Judaism that's out there. That's actually a response to Reformed doctrine. And so it's important that we understand that as well. There is also an ultra-Orthodox, I think that's a term that most of us know. They call themselves Haredi, or Haredi. And that is a very traditional group that really kind of rejected all of modernism. There's a Hasidic movement. That's actually an Ashkenazic mystical movement. And then there's Kabbalah. You may have heard of that before. It's a highly mystical, kind of grew out of Spain. And then there's a secular Judaism, which actually is bordering on non-religious. So when you talk to someone who says they are Jewish, you may find them in one of these. There's also a few others, but this is the major ones that have the most population to them. Go back to Reformed. That was a pretty bold move back in the 1800s. They're trying to the people who were starting the Reform movement were trying to actually make Judaism a lot more assimilated. Look over in that column, it says particularity. They're trying to fully assimilate into their local culture. And there's a lot of things in the Jewish religion that make them stand out, like having Shabbat, the Sabbath, on a Saturday. Those kinds of things that are out of step with their Christian hosts, which actually had, of course, Sunday was the Christian Sabbath. Their worship, the Reformed group actually started borrowing from Christianity. They started to shorten their services, started to bring in music, spoke in the vernacular in the Reformed synagogues, or actually sometimes even the Reformed temples. They call themselves temples more. They were, and when it comes to the Torah, they did not look at it as a book that was given by God, but just as man's understanding of God's law. So there's a lot of higher criticism that's baked into the Reformed tradition. Halakha is their way of their means of living. They think ethical monotheism is the thing that they want to champion, and not the 613 mitzvot. Mitzvot are the commands that are actually comes out of the oral and the written Torah. We'll get to that in a little bit. They don't subscribe so much to that the 613 mitzvot really has much of a hold today. Conservative disagrees. They still borrow some of their worship from their Christian neighbors. They try to be fully assimilated, but they do actually hold a little bit closer ties to the Torah as it has been understood throughout all of Jewish history. And they think that the 613 mitzvot are binding. Orthodox, we see them a little bit even more conservative in the way they do it. They worship especially. They keep Hebrew prayers and the vernacular sermons. They're moderately assimilative. They keep some of their particularity. Haredi actually goes into fully particularized. They have a definite, distinct look about them. You probably have seen some of these Jewish members who, in the ultra-Orthodox, who still wear the black hats and black coats and those kinds of things. The Hasidic is more of a mystical following. They follow actually a tzaddik, or sometimes called Rebbe. The Hasidic movement has got that mystical idea to it, but it really grew out of the Ashkenazi movement, Ashkenazi communities, especially like in Hungary. The Kabbalah movement is a very mystical group. They grew out of Spain, and then the secular is those that can include agnostic and atheistic Jews. People that are in the secular that you may know as like Albert Einstein, Marcel Proust, the famous French writer, Franz Kafka, people like that. So it really grew out of Baruch Spinoza's work and writings that happened, back in the 1600s. So that gives you an idea of how the secular Jews think. They still think an ethical Judaism is the way to go. They do like to participate in the Jewish holidays. That's more of a cultural thing than it is a spiritual thing for them. So, and you'll run into all shapes, forms, and sizes. About 14 to 15% of the Jewish population in the United States are secular. So be aware of that. If you're really curious about some of the belief systems and the way that that some of the Jewish religions, especially the Ashkenazi traditions, the movie Fiddler on the Roof is just fantastic. It's delightful on so many levels. It's a beautiful story, beautiful music, but the story of just the struggles that Tevye goes through and his family really speak well to the nuanced relationship that the Jewish community has had, especially with modernism. So it's worth a look, and it's great. Especially if you spend some time with this information, you probably pick up a lot of nuances in their story that will make it even much more meaningful. Another great movie that's out there that can be helpful to you is Woody Allen's movie Crimes and Misdemeanors. Is back in 1989, and Woody Allen, just brilliant filmmaker. This is one of those, he really shows what life is like as a secular Jew. He has asked some very pointed questions in this movie that are just great. It'll give you a good sense of things and some of the anxieties of living a Jewish life in a Gentile world. And so it's worth it to spend some time with that. And if you've ever read Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, you'll have to enjoy a lot of the parody of that book that's actually in this movie. Woody Allen just really shows his chops really nicely in this movie. And I think it would be enjoyable for you to see some of the existential angst that's in the story. So let's jump to Talmud Torah. This is a phrase that you'll hear when you talk to people who are very much ingrained in the teachings of Judaism. Jews are people of the book, or books, I guess I should say. They have actually, the Torah is actually the 5 books of Moses. I put a gold border around that to show its special attention we should draw it. That's the primary touchstone of the Jewish religion. That's if you're a Christian, it's the Old Testament, the first 5 books of the written Torah of the Old Testament. It's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And that's part of the Hebrew Bible. There are other books in the Hebrew Bible, like the prophets. It's called the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, or the writings. That would be like the Samuel and Chronicles and Proverbs and Psalms and Lamentations and things like that. Then those are the writings. So the Tanakh, which is actually a little acrostic for Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, TNK, they call it the Tanakh, and that's the written Torah, the complete Hebrew Bible. And if you're Christian, that's your Old Testament. The Talmud is actually the oral Torah, and that's the books that are written after the written Torah was put down. These are books that were connected. The first printing of the Mishnah happened in the 3rd century, around 200 to 220 AD, or in Jewish terms that'd be CE, in the Common Era. The Mishnah is a collection of writings, or at least rabbinical ideas on what the Torah, applying the Torah to everyday life. The first compilation was mostly halakha, which is actually teaching. Those are actually the laws of Judaism. And then there's another collection of writings called the Gemara. Those are almost like I almost think of them almost like the commentaries. There's mostly Agadah, which is actually stories and aphorisms and things like that. It's really kind of a collection of everything, even dissenting opinions about different ways of actually interpreting some of the Jewish law is in the Talmud, and especially in the Gemara. The Gemara is many books, big, huge library. So the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, is a very small bit. You can hold that in your hand. You can hold the whole Tanakh in your hand, the whole written Torah. And you can hold probably the Mishnah and the Torah and the Tanakh together. When you get to Gemara, you can't hold all those books. There's just so many. If you go to Jewish seminary, you spend a lot of time in the Mishnah and the Gemara, because that's where the majority of the literature is for the faith. We call these the 10 Commandments and the Christian tradition, but for the Jewish community, they don't call them the 10 Commandments. They call them actually the Decalogue, because that is actually the collection of the first 10 commandments of a much bigger collection of commands, called the 613 mitzvot. Mitzvot are the mitzvah are those teachings, or the laws of the Jewish religion. There are 365 negative and 248 affirmative, and there's a big long list that's available. You can go online and look it up. Just type in 613 mitzvot. Mitzvot is plural for mitzvah, which is one. One command would be just the one mitzvah. And this says there are 613 mitzvot. There you go. So there are a lot of different laws. Most of these laws are actually very practical applications of the many of the laws that are listed, not just in the 10 Commandments, but all the way through the whole, the whole Torah, the whole 5 books of Moses. And so all the laws of Leviticus and other places are used as well to create that list of 613. One rabbi was asked by one of his students,
if you got stranded on a island and it could only take book of Jewish one Jewish book with you, which one would you take? And he was expecting, of course, the Torah or something like that. The rabbi returns and says, no, take the Jewish calendar. And that would be your best way of actually being able to stay in touch with the Jewish community and the Jewish tradition. And that's really, really interesting that he said that, because it's really true. The Jewish calendar is very powerful, and this is what really knits the community together, is that there's celebration of many ideas at the same time in the same way that really makes the religion have coherence. So with that in mind, there's one part of the calendar that's the most important, the most beautiful part of the Jewish timeline, and that happens to be Shabbat. And it seems so familiar to us because it happens once every 7 days, but for the Jewish religion, it is the primary, the premier, the most important, and the most beautiful of all of the celebrations in the Jewish religion. And a lot of people who are Jewish, who are observant Jewish, really celebrate the Shabbat in some very gorgeous ways. Shabbat actually starts on Friday night and runs through Saturday night. It starts when the sun first sets from Friday night, and it will not end until you can see 3 stars in the sky on Saturday night. And that's when the official Shabbat is over. And I was talking to a good friend of mine who is Jewish, and he was talking, I asked him, this was a Monday morning, we went to lunch one time after a business meeting, and I said, well, how was your weekend? And he just was regaling me stories of a wonderful celebration of Shabbat he had with some of his friends. And just to hear him talk just really warmed my heart, to see just the traditions and how beautiful this was for him and his family to talk about Shabbat in such a glorious way. And I was glad that he actually shared that with me. It was important for me to hear. It's a beautiful thing, and if you ever have an opportunity to study some of the traditions of Shabbat, you will not be disappointed. It's really important stuff, and it's a really beautiful and gorgeous ceremony that observant Jews put together, all the way from the prayers, the lighting of the candles, to the meal itself, conversations around the meal. Everything about it is a very beautiful thing. And it's something maybe we as Christians should learn from, just how to really sit down and really celebrate together. Very, very, very neat, and a very important tradition in the Jewish religion. The Jewish calendar looks, I'm going to go very fast through this. We could spend a couple hours on this, but we're not going to be able to in this short overview. In the fall, which actually is the beginning of the year for the Jewish calendar, which actually falls in the 7th month of their lunar calendar, Tishrei, is the 7th month in the lunar calendar of Judaism. The beginning of the new year starts with Rosh Hashanah, and you may have heard about that. But that's when they blow the shofar, the ram's horn. It's an incredible celebration of the beginning of life, of the beginning of the creation of man and woman, and it's just a really amazing moment. And the traditions that surround Rosh Hashanah are really important. A week later, Yom Kippur is the next big celebration that the Jewish community focuses on, and that is the Day of Atonement, and that is a day of fasting. And it's an amazing thing that a lot of observant Jews do for Yom Kippur. It's really a chance for everyone just to take stock of their lives. Are they on the right path? Are they doing the right things? Is there anything that's left that is unresolved with my neighbor, my friends? It's a beautiful moment, the Yom Kippur is. And then a week after that is Sukkot, which is actually the Feast of Tabernacles, or the booths. Sukkot means booths. You may have heard that phrase. It's a week-long celebration. The people actually eat meals in a hut that they make that reminds them of the 40 years that the Israelis were in the wilderness before they entered the Promised Land in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible. And so it's a really beautiful celebration Sukkot has going, and a lot of people go to Jerusalem for this, and it's a beautiful thing. Simchat Torah is actually on the very back end of Sukkot, and Simchat Torah is the actual day when they finish reading the Torah from completely all 5 books. There's a schedule of readings to be able to read all the Torah throughout the whole year. And on this particular day, they conclude at the end of Deuteronomy with Moses' death and begin on that same day with Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then they will continue that reading cycle all the way through the next year. And they do that on that interesting day in order to show the seamlessness of Torah and that it's constantly ever moving. The winter months, there are only 2 really important points on the calendar. Is Hanukkah, and sometimes you see it spelled with just the H with 2 Ks. Either way, it just depends upon your tradition how you spell that. But Hanukkah is actually more celebrated in the United States than anywhere else in the Jewish world because of how close it comes to Christmas. But it is a celebration of the rededication of the Second Temple when they needed oil to light the lamp for 8 days, and they only had 1 day's worth of oil, and it lasted all the way through the 8 days of Hanukkah. It's really a beautiful, beautiful celebration. Purim is when they actually celebrate the story of Esther, and that's usually in March-ish area. All of these Jewish holidays will move because they're based upon a lunar calendar, so move from week to, almost by a week or more per year. So that's the reason why we just give kind of real rough dates. The spring, there's a Pesach. Pesach is actually Passover, and if you've been around, the Jewish community, you know how important that day is. And then also Shavuot is actually the what we call Pentecost, and those 2 days are really important as well. And then into the summer, there's also Tisha B'Av, which is it's a day of fasting for the destruction of the 2 temples, and remember that. Also, during the period of Pesach to Shavuot, there's quite a few small little remembrance days that are in there. One of them is the day to remember the suffering in Germany of Shoah, which is a really tragic day. So that gives you kind of a sense of the Jewish calendar. It's really important to the Jewish community how this works. Let's talk a little bit about how the Jews view the Messiah. This is important for Christians, especially since we are claiming that we're following the Messiah of the Jewish religion. There's still Messianism out there. It's taught by the rabbis, and that there is a Messiah still to come. Just so you know, there have been quite a few Messiahs in history. I just listed a few up here on my screen for you. I put the ones in bold, the ones that are most known by people. There are more than this, but these are gives you kind of a sense of it. You see Jesus of Nazareth on the left side, along with Judas Maccabeus, of the Maccabees. Simon Bar Kokhba, we talked about the Bar Kokhba revolt. I highlighted that one. Another one back in the 1600s was Sabbatai Tzvi. Sabbatai Tzvi was a really popular religious leader in Turkey that was actually listed as a possible Messiah as well. And then just recently, he died in the 90s, was Menachem Mendel Schneerson. You may hear that name from time to time. There's still some people today who think he is coming back as the Messiah. So a lot of interesting things here. Now, this is interesting for us to know as Christians because the Jews have been there, done that, and have got the T-shirt when it comes to Messiahs and people who actually claim Messiahship. And a lot of the questions that we ask is, well, what's their view of Jesus? And they see Jesus as a very incredibly wise man and a noted teacher, but they look at him really as a failed Messiah. The reason why they looked at him as a failed Messiah is because of really several reasons, but here are the ones most prominent, is that he didn't bring peace. There were still problems in the world after he left. And he did not establish a political kingdom, and that has been taught by the rabbis all throughout history, that a political kingdom will come as a result of the Messiah. And he also had a shamed death. And when it comes to the peace issue, they actually use a New Testament verse to kind of say, see, he wasn't the Messiah that you think he is. And they look at Luke 2, verses 13 and 14. When the angels came to the shepherds in the field, and they said this, and suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly hosts praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. And they said, well, if according to your tradition, there was angels that came that promised that this Messiah would bring peace on earth. And where is it? There is no peace on earth. And so they do not accept Jesus as their Messiah because of these reasons. So I mention that to you so that you understand, if you talk to people that are Jewish, they will be respectful of Jesus, but they will not hold to him as being the Messiah because they don't think that he meets the criteria of a Messiah as they understand it. To get caught in those conversations is a difficult one, but I want you to understand their perspective. They call us Goyim, that we're Gentile is another way of saying it, and there's a relationship that we need to understand there. They look at themselves as actually being God's chosen people that has been given a very specific role to play in the world. And this is the verse they use in Isaiah 42:6. They say this is actually the Lord talking to the children of Israel. He says, I am the Lord, I have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations. And this is a phrase that they use a lot. They are the light for the nations. And that's what the role that the Jews see that they play. And for anybody who is not a Jew, doesn't necessarily need to worry so much about all the laws and the Mishnah and all the laws in the Mishnah and the Torah, and they don't tell us that we need to do anything but abide by the Noahide laws. These are 7 laws that they actually outlined for non-Jews in order to be in good standing with God. He says, well, the first one is do not deny God. Second one is do not blaspheme God. Third one is do not murder. Fourth one is do not engage in incestuous, adulterous, or homosexual relationships. The fifth one is do not steal. Sixth one is do not eat of a live animal, which I understand is that an animal that's alive, you just eat the flesh right off of a live animal. And then seventh one is establish courts, legal system to ensure law obedience. If non-Jews are doing this, then they're in good standing with God. All the other things about observing the Sabbath and doing all the 613 mitzvot, that's just for the chosen people. So they're not necessarily telling us that that we're pushed aside by God, but we just don't have to carry that burden of being the chosen people. That's the unique role that they have. So a lot of Jews are offended by Christian proselytizing. They think that we're thinking that their religion's broken, and they don't think their religion's broken at all. They do agree with many of the moral and ethical initiatives that Christians are worried about and are concerned about, want to do some good in the world. So they favor interfaith cooperation, but they don't really enjoy the interfaith dialogue because many of them believe it always ends up with a proselytization into the Christian faith, and that actually is based upon the assumption that their faith is somehow wrong, that needs to be fixed. This is important for us to realize because a lot of times we step in there and we think we're doing them a great favor by just bringing that up to them, that they need to fix their faith in order to be a child of God, and this is a deeply troubling thing to them. So I want you to understand it from their point of view. So what should the Christian's response be to all this? Well, it's a very complicated question, but I want to give you a few things to think about. One of them is that, first of all, as Christians, we need to accept Judaism as a contemporary living faith. It's not that stale faith of the Old Testament. I think it's easy to classify it as that. But really, it's about people living in the 21st century who are trying to do real good in the world, trying to be true to the God that they know, and be aware of that and accept it for what that is. They're not, and it's easy for us to belittle the faith of the Jews when really we should not be. John 13, we've already mentioned this verse many times that Jesus gave when Jesus told his disciples. He says, "So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. This is one of the best, apologetics we can do, is just pure, unadulterated love. And we need to remember that when people are actually attracted to religions, it's usually from the point of beauty and goodness that it actually turns their head. And then they migrate towards truth based upon the beauty and goodness of the religion. I think that should tell us as Christians that we should be very concerned about how we talk about our faith and live out our faith in front of others. There is a beauty and a goodness to the Christian gospel, and we should accept it for what it can do for people, and just live it out with incredible openness and with love, and we'll find that God will do many things through that effort, and that will really be amazing to see. So that's just to keep that in the back of your mind as we talk, as we go forward. We must radiate the beauty and the glory of our faith as Christians, and we must trust God for the salvation of the Jews. The Jews don't think they need to be saved, so that's not a concern that we can really help with, but at the same token, we can give them an understanding that they can have a wonderful, connected relationship to their God through what we know of Jesus Christ. So just think about that and pray over it and see where that leads you. So I hope this has been a great conversation, helpful conversation to you when it comes to understanding Judaism. A lot here, and I'll try to keep it as short as possible, but there was a lot here that we needed to talk about. So thank you very much.